Welcome to Chapel, our leadership lead-in. We believe in the potential of people to shape the world for good. If you've been leading a team, a family, or a business for a week or a decade, we want to create a space where we can grow and learn together. I hope you enjoy this discussion.
Leadership is example, and it means that whatever you lead, the buck stops with you. And so if you think about that, if you're a dad, and it comes to the way you connect with your children, no one else is responsible or accountable for your fatherhood. The buck stops with you. All of us, whether you're a mum, whether you're a dad, whether you're a husband, whether you're a wife, whether you just have a job with your own job profile, you're responsible, you're accountable for that job profile. The buck stops with you. And when I think about leadership and the fact that the buck stops with you, I think about example. That's the obvious one, the clear one. I think about courage. Leadership is a whole lot of courage. I think about man management, just being great at managing various personalities and various people, something we all have to learn in and we all have to grow in. One thing I do know is when I was much younger, I didn't understand that at all. Pretty well, the way it is the way it is. And I think there are certain things that are without compromise and it affects everybody. But I was amazed watching The Last Dance. It's sort of been the massive, big Netflix hit documentary during this time. And of course, it's about Michael Jordan. And I was watching Phil Jackson, so many leadership lessons in it. I've watched all 10 of them. And I was so disappointed when it came to an end too quick. But Phil Jackson was the coach of the Chicago Bulls and won there six rings, 6 championships, which is pretty amazing. But it was really intriguing to watch the way he handled Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman, for anyone who doesn't know, he's different. He's kind of crazy, eccentric. He loved to party. And it was just really, really interesting to watch how Phil Jackson, and to a degree even Michael Jordan, managed the craziness of Rodman to get the best out of him. So there's a whole lot of different sides to leadership. But the one thing I do know is that if something goes wrong, the captain has to be the last man off the ship, right? I'm pretty sure there was an Italian cruise liner. Cruise liner's been in the news a little this year. And it got too close to rocks and tipped over, some of you might remember. And it was pretty well just right on the coast of Italy. And if I haven't got my disasters mixed up, the captain and his key crew were accused of basically deserting ship while there were people still on the ship. They saved themselves, which of course is not taking accountability. And so whether we like it or not, if we want to be leaders, if we want to have responsibility in any way, we have to understand where the buck stops. And the buck stops with you. And ultimately, leadership, yes, it's example and it's man management and it's courage and it's a whole lot of things, but leadership is accountability. And there's some things you can't delegate when it comes to your responsibility. It's accountability. Everyone has to be accountable for their own job description, and no one else can take that from you. You have to do what you've been asked to do, the things you've been trusted to do. But of course, the department head is ultimately accountable for the things that you and all your teammates are accountable for. So they have ultimate accountability. And then when you're the senior pastor, the global. Make sure when you address me, you don't forget that part, all right? The global. How many global senior pastors do you know? I'm accountable for the whole globe. Listen to me, though. It's true. I have ultimate accountability, which is scary. And the board, who I answer to, they have ultimate accountability. You can't accept responsibility without understanding accountability. Just right now, a lot of you would have seen on the news that the government made just a tiny mistake when it came to JobKeeper. They decided it was going to cost $130 billion, and that would put the country, obviously, in another $130 billion debt. For Australia, that is just like mind-boggling. $130 billion debt. But it turns out that there was a slight miscalculation and they were out by $60 billion. Instead of a $130 billion debt, the country suddenly, for the country, it suddenly became a $70 billion debt, almost half. The good news about that, by the way, is it was an awesome surprise because what our country, you, the taxpayers, are going to have to pay was virtually halved. It was a huge surprise, but I watched Josh Frydenberg, he's the treasurer, and he talked about how someone had just made a miscalculation, just maybe one line on a piece of paper. Instead of it being over 6 million people who would qualify for JobKeeper, it was only 3-point-something million. And so he told that story. It wasn't actually physically him necessarily, but then he said, ultimately, I'm accountable. And that's leadership. When the buck stops, what's our response to that? How do we do with that? No decision should ever be made without serious consideration of the ramifications. I think sometimes when it comes to decisions, when you know the buck stops with you, you take whatever that decision is and you turn it upside down and you take time to look at it from every angle. What are the possibilities? What's the upside? What is the downside? How will people respond? You have to do that because of the importance of accountability. I find sometimes when big decisions have been made in church life that maybe were a total change of direction, big decisions that might evoke or provoke a whole lot of questions, I think it's really important that you think about it from the perspective of what the questions might be. So that when you talk about it, you already answer people's questions before the questions are even asked. I think it's so important as believers, faith-filled believers, and part of a team, part of a staff on a church, that when the buck stops with us, we understand the importance of being prayerful. Not just stepping out in our own strength. We've got the power of prayer. We need to believe to hear from the Holy Spirit. I think it's important that you be courageous. I think it's important that you involve other people in helping you to be able to make right decisions in a family, for example. I think it's fantastic if a husband and wife can talk and communicate. That's what my wife says my big challenge is, communication. But hey, if you can communicate, talk things through, say, yes, maybe, sir, you're in this instance accountable as a dad, but you don't just make arbitrary decisions on your own. No, not at all. And Mum, maybe you're accountable, but you don't just run off and not inform the person who you're doing life with. And so here's some questions for you when the buck stops with you. You ready for this? Some questions for you when the buck stops with you. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. Hopefully you'll see them on the screen. Maybe you want to take some screenshots, up to you. But here's the first one. What could you have been a part of if you just had more courage? So I'm really talking about when the buck stops with you. Can you make the big decisions? Can you make the courageous decisions? I think as a leader, many people would think of only back then I had a little more guts. I had a little more courage. I think things could have been so much different. Number two, what harm has it caused because you were just too cavalier? I think that's a really important question because maybe you can see that in other people. If you just thought about your own life, your own world, when it comes to the debt you allow yourself to get into, and you just rushed into it, you got excited, you just rushed in it, you didn't really count the cost. So what harm has it caused? Number three, what help could you have had if you just sought some counsel? You made a decision, the buck stops with you, and now you're seeing consequence you didn't expect. Imagine what help you could have had if you just sought some counsel. Not just any counsel, by the way, the right counsel. Number four, what diversion did you take because you listened to the wrong voices? What diversion did you take? Think about that for a moment, people in life, in the big, big issues of life. They took counsel, they just took it from all the wrong people. Instead of their life going where it should have gone, where it could have gone, they take this giant diversion. And so when it comes to the buck stopping with you, specifically decisions, we're all accountable ultimately for our own spirit. And if I am accountable for my own spirit, then I've got to listen to the right voices, because I get the wrong voices in my head. I've talked many times about that king. Was it Ahab? Whoever it was in the Old Testament, Ahab, I think, and he listened to 400 different prophets. 400 who said, yeah, go to war. They told him what he wanted to hear. There was only one who had the guts to tell him what he needed to hear. And he didn't react too well to somebody who gave him godly counsel. And so let's keep on making sure, no matter where our spirit's out, that we don't change the voices we listen to and exchange them for voices that can take us on a massive, sad life detour that you never needed to take. Number 5, what could have been different if you listened to that tug in your own spirit? I wonder what could have been different when you're making decisions and the buck stops with you. If you didn't ignore just that little tug in your spirit, you've got to take notice of that. Do you know when the church bought our Rosebery site, we were going to build a church there, and we were hoping to build a building. I think it was going to seat, was it 3,000 people, George? Whatever, it was significant, it was big, maybe 2,000 something people. And I just had this tug the whole time. We had a developer who, or one of the developers, not everyone in the development company, but one of the developers kept saying, no, it's going to be fine, it's going to be easy. I know the council, everything's going to be fine. Don't worry about it, this is going to be a cinch. And so I'm listening to that, and I'm thinking he's got experience, but I just had this feeling. I got a little bit of experience, looked at the piece of land and thought, I think this land is too small for such a huge, huge development. Well, of course, ultimately the council voted against it, whatever their numbers were, to nil. In other words, every single councillor was going to, it didn't go that far, was going to vote against it. So we ultimately pulled out. Well, God was gracious. God was gracious because that piece of land ultimately, after a big, big journey, became a massive blessing to our church. But we've got to learn in life, when the buck stops with you, don't ignore your still small voice. Don't allow impulse. Don't allow, your eyes being bigger than your spirit when it comes to maybe the way we move forward and the things we jump at. Let's just understand the importance of going to God and listening to God. And number 6, what fallout could you have avoided if you treated people better? Because when the buck stops with you, and sometimes over the years you've mistreated people, spoken down at them, you're patronizing, you're short, these things always come back. They always come back to bite you. And I wonder what fallout you could have avoided if you just treated your people better. Who would still be with you? Who would still be with you that you know you'd be better off to still have them in your court, on your side? And number 7, what price are you paying because you let your heart get wounded? Never develop a wounded spirit. If you've been on our staff more than 5 minutes, you've heard me tell that story. Whatever happens to you in life, I was taught as a Bible college student, never develop a wounded spirit. Again, when it comes to your spirit, the buck stops with you. Don't blame anyone else. Don't blame anyone who offended you. Don't blame anyone who spoke badly about you. Don't blame anybody who didn't give you the responsibility and hey, Adam, I just remembered. I don't know how. I just remembered right now in the mid-sentence that I've got to talk to people about you, okay? So we'll get to it. We'll get to it. Don't worry. You didn't come all the way in here, waste all that gas, petrol, to come the 4 minutes from where you live for nothing. I'll remember. So number 8, what ground would you have taken if you did not, isn't that weird, by the way? I was mid-sentence, now I'm doing it again. Mid-sentence, and that randomly came into my head. Who knows why? It's called the Holy Spirit. When you are as spiritual as me, even when your mind and your voice is going one direction, you still hear the voice of the Spirit. Do you think one day God might strike me dead? I hope not. I hope not. It was a joke. Do you think God's got to sit to you? Do you think he even understands my humor? I mean, half of you don't. And the other half only give me laughs out of pity. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm still here. He must be okay. So what ground would you have taken if you did not retreat from the battle? You got scared. You got scared. Sometimes people retreat from the big decisions because they know the buck stops with them. And you can't live your life if you're going to be called a leader without realizing, number one, the buck stops with you. But sometimes leadership is spelled R-I-S-K, just like faith is spelled R-I-S-K. I wonder what blessing you could have enjoyed if you did not retreat from the battle. Got to have some guts. Number 9. Hey, I'll tell you a little example. Again, just popped in my head, but it's what happens when you're sensitive to the Holy Spirit. When we started Hills campus. It was the 3rd church we had started. I was 26 when we started the first, and someone just told me, I think it was the 25th of May, yesterday. It was exactly 40 years since someone who was a part of it, that's right, wrote to me from Queensland, someone I haven't heard from for decades, and told me it was exactly 40 years yesterday since we started that very first church that we started in the Central Coast. Well, what steps did you miss because you were in too much of a hurry, I wonder? I wonder. Hurrying's dangerous. I crushed a third, at least, of my collarbone and separated my shoulder by trying to rush down the stairs and catching my heel on the back stair, or the back of the stair when I was going down. And you know what? If I fall down the stairs, it's nobody else's fault. The buck stops with me. I just remember being in the hospital and vomiting my guts out because of the anesthesia for hours, while the guy right beside me was doing exactly the same thing. It was a vomit fest. But the buck stops with me. No one else's fault. Number 10, what knowledge would you have if you buckled down to study? I mean, you can look back now and wish Leroy Burns was here. He's going, come on, come on. So, but think about that for a moment. I would encourage any of our young pastors, massive discipline, massive responsibility. You're going to have to really change your priorities, but any of our young pastors who can, I think you should do the extra study. If you've got a diploma or whatever it is that you get after 2, maybe even 3 years of Bible college, what I would say is think about just now, because you're doing something different and it's occupying your time, at least think about it. Whether or not that's a possibility. You got people like JD who are doing that. And Brendan Brown, the whole time he was part of our staff, I didn't even know he was doing it. I think 6 years later, might even have been 8 years, he got his degree. And so you say, well, it's too hard, it's too much, and maybe it is. Maybe it's not practical for you, not practical right now. But the reality is, it's no point getting later in life when you're preaching the word and you're preaching to a lot of people. It's too late then. I think, gee, I wish I studied more when I was younger. And so here's some qualities of those who handle well where the buck stops. You understand? So when the buck stops with you, here's some of the qualities you're going to need. The first one I already talked about, and that's accountability. You just can't get away from it. You cannot accept responsibility without taking accountability. And one of the things about promotion is you're going to find yourself not just accountable for your own choices, your own decisions, your own output, your own performance, but you're actually responsible and accountable for everybody you lead. You have ultimate accountability. Our Australian church board, in fact, it may have been all of our board, global board, two different boards these days, the global board and our Australian board. I can't quite remember, but what I do know is we all had to do directors training, because when it comes to Hillsong, we are the directors. That is our whole board. And directors training, it was interesting. Peter Toggs, he actually went with one of our other guys, I forget who, and they went to an actual course doing director training. Oh, Peter, by the end, was punch drunk. There's just so much information. But I'll tell you why. It's important you get director training, because if you decide you're going to be a director, as in legally, a director of any company, any ministry, any church, you are ultimately accountable. You are ultimately responsible. And the scary part about all of that is, especially in something that's diverse and big and broad and has so many different arms and so many different people and choices that are being made that maybe are 7 or 10 generations away from you, degree of separation, 7 or 10 different people away from you, guess who is ultimately responsible? Guess where the buck actually ultimately stops? It's just a reality. So that's why you take time to listen to the experts and get trained. I personally thought most of it was just common sense. And the common sense is understanding your responsibility and understanding that ultimately you're accountable. Well, it's the same at every level. Ultimately, you're accountable. That's how I rode my motorbike. When I rode my motorbike, I decided I was going to make the decision, any accident is my fault. So if a guy goes through a stop sign and hits me, I decide it's my fault. That's how I tell myself, and it very much changes the way you ride. You don't go through stop signs without very carefully thinking about the fact that guy might come straight through the stop sign. I mean, there's some things that can happen, and I don't believe they ever will, that there's just nothing you could have done, but I think in life that's how we have to live. A lot of our people have found out, that just to go say, yeah, I'll be on your board, I'll be on your committee, it may be a ministry, it may be a friend, it might be, and you just want to be a blessing, you want to be kind. And a lot of people have found out the hard way that if you basically take responsibility to be on a board, the buck stops with you. And we need to understand that. But it's a bigger principle. It's really about life itself, accountability. Number 2, I think this is something a lot of people don't understand. Loneliness. When you are the person where ultimately the buck stops, no one else can necessarily make that decision for you. They can guide, they can lead, they can give counsel. But when it comes to the big things in life, and the buck stops with you, that can be a lonely place. I think about Jesus. No one else could go to the cross for him, could carry the heavy cross all the way up to Golgotha, all the way up that little mountain. No one else could do that for him, take the beatings and the mocking and everything else. No one else could decide to take the nails for him, die for him, and then win atonement for others for him. Atonement, in case you don't understand, is simple. It's just reconciliation between you and God through Jesus Christ. That's the atonement. Well, no one else could do it for him. And I'm telling you, in Gethsemane, when it was right in front of him, it was a lonely place for Jesus. It was a lonely place. And when no one else can make decisions for you, you've got to get alone. You've got to get aside. You've got to decide to hear and listen for what the Spirit is saying. Like in the book of Revelation and all those churches, it constantly talks about what the Spirit says. Do we get aside enough from the noise and the chatter? Do we allow ourselves to get lonely enough to make some of those big decisions? That's why I love aeroplanes. I miss them. I miss this about them. That for me, it's fantastic meditation time. Some of the biggest, if you like, vision in our church came from me having the solitude on a plane. I mean, you're always going to get that person beside you who wants to chatter too much, but when you travel, when you live in Australia, everywhere mostly is a long way. So you have time. And when you're alone, it's just you and God. And so let's always take that time. Let's always decide. I understand the importance of that time. And it's in that place of loneliness. You think about the consequences. You think about the options. You think about the potential fruit or lack thereof. You think about the risk quotient. In other words, is the level of risk worth the fruit it may bring? You think about the impact on morale. So if you're making a choice for your part of responsibility, but the impact may be on a whole lot of other people. Do you think about the impact on the morale? Do you think about the expected blessing, the expected benefit? There's just times you've got to be alone, and no one can make the decision for you. Sometimes small businesses like this, super successful. And they're doing so well. It's small, it's very manageable. And you think, you know what, I could do more of this. And it happens a whole lot. And so people expand. Maybe they expand too quickly. And all of a sudden, the cash dries up. They have cash flow problems. And there's a crisis. Well, that's where we have to understand the importance of taking the time and getting aside and being alone enough to really think about the accountability at the end of the day. And is the risk worth the cost? And can I tell you this, by the way? The truth is, some people, they decide no when they should have decided yes. Number 3, strength, courage. But we'll call it strength. There are times when you have to be strong, you have to be resolute, you have to be reassuring to people. You have to be confident and calm. I think this is the perfect time to demonstrate that. We all who are in any level of accountability, it's so important, our own demeanor, our own outlook. Are we resolute? Are we full of faith? Are we calm? Even when there's a whole lot of reasons to have storm for pastors, especially lead pastors and senior pastors all over the globe. There's never been a time like this before. And we've never had to see how a church would do in a time like this before. I've been looking at, the amount of people, peak concurrent users, unique users, and maybe less important, but total hits. And what is really cool is over the last 4 weeks, we've been growing. That includes youth, that includes every part of church life, the kids, but obviously mostly the mass of it is our church online. And I'm so encouraged by that. I'm encouraged because in America, the statistics say the trend is the opposite since Easter. It's been a slide downward. Well, it's a time when you have a lot to think about, to be concerned about, and the natural to worry about finances. We've never gone 10 weeks without taking up physical offerings in church. we never have. So how's it going to turn out? We're doing okay. I'd like to see it slightly ahead of where it is, but big picture, we're doing okay. But you don't know that. And what if this goes more months? You say, well, where's your faith? To be honest with you, I don't think we're going to be all in church together like we used to for a while yet. So yeah, I could pretend and I could suddenly have faith that all of a sudden all the premiers around Australia are going to have this radical shift. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's going to be a while yet. So naturally speaking, as the gloss wears off, if you like, the novelty wears off, can we keep that engagement? I'm so encouraged. I mean, I can't even believe the figure that our pastors in every area of church life have made 73,000 phone calls and contacts with people, because that's the important part. We've got the people we know part of church. It's encouraging at Hills, for example, to see what we now call crews. They were called PSGs, whatever that is. It's a soccer club in Paris. But crew is so much better than, what was it? Pre-service gatherings. Crew, I like that. Well, anyway, Hills has been growing. And in fact, now it's been 10 weekends. The next one will be our 11th weekend. It's been growing. So that's fantastic. But we know that that's the people who are heavily engaged. We know you're heavily engaged. We know maybe a big majority of our church. But then there's people on the edges. They're not online. They're not. So all I'm saying is this is an unprecedented, unknown time for the church. There's a lot to worry about. But can I tell you this? I've decided I'm just going to stay calm. I'm just going to trust God, and I'm going to make the best of the season. Bobby and I are not jet lagged for the first time in, I reckon, 25 years. Yeah, you say, why does Brian look so fresh? Well, there's two reasons. Three. One is lighting. One is makeup. I love it when they put my makeup on in the morning. It's beautiful. Hey, and number three, I'm not jet lagged. It's probably bad because the more relaxed I am, the more dangerous it gets. And the buck stops with me. I mean, on an aeroplane, there's an unusual noise. Especially if you're an experienced flyer and you hear a noise that's like, that doesn't seem normal. Or maybe they pull off the thrusters all of a sudden when you take off. If you're not used to flying, you take off, you get going, then all of a sudden they pull it back. And you're like, what's that? Well, at times like that, what I do, I look at the flight attendant. I don't want them to look freaked out. I want them to look like everything's fine, everything's cool. In fact, I haven't even noticed what it is you're wearing. I'm not going to look at the freaked out first-time flyer sitting beside me. Yeah, taking Valium tablets. I'm not going to look at them. No. And it's the same for you. When you've got ultimate responsibility, let's remember. Our persona, our demeanor is so important. And number four, decisiveness. I just think it's really important when the buck stops with you that you have to be decisive. And again, when the buck does stop with you, I'll tell you this, your timing won't always be pleasing to others. You'll be slow, too slow for some who want answers yesterday. Usually those people, they gave you a deadline, the day before yesterday, and they say, the deadline is this day. It's like, well, too bad. I'm not going to be decided by your timing when it comes to the buck stopping with me. I'm going to work to the right time. So you'll be too slow for others and you'll be too quick for some people who are rattled by the smallest of changes. Oh, what's happening? Well, listen to me. Procrastination never helps. But conversely, due diligence is critical. Know the difference between procrastination and due diligence, because there is a big difference when it comes to some of the big decisions I've had to make over church life and people. I don't make those decisions lightly. I take a long time to consider it and to think about it and to think about the potential cost and to think about the potential gain. I think about my own spirit. So is this my problem? I think all those things through because the buck stops with me. And I think sometimes we need to work to the right timing, but not other people's agendas, not other people's deadlines, and not other people's fears, because the buck stops with you. There's a difference between procrastination and preparation for certainty in the big decisions. In other words, you want to make those decisions with certainty. And so you got to agonize over it sometimes. You do have to think about what the cost would be, what the benefits would be, where it's coming from in you. I'm talking specifically now about people. And often you sense something's not right here. You sense the heart issue a long time before ultimately you make the choice. But when you make the choice, You are so certain about it that you face it with confidence. I think that's important, and that takes me to number 5. We are going to go slightly over time, but what else are you going to do? Yeah? What else are you going to do? Besides, I'm the boss. And so everyone else, nope, they can't go over time. But number 5, the buck stops with me. If you get angry with me, the buck stops with you. Okay, number 5, confidence. When the buck stops with you, it's easy to become uncertain, get dithery, get fearful. I see it all the time. And if you look rattled, everyone else is going to be rattled. It's the same thing again. When it comes to some of the attacks that come against Hillsong, I'm talking obviously about the media. I can't control what people say. Their skewered agendas, and I can't control any of that. But I have learned this: if it's not a crisis to me, it's not a crisis to anyone else. So I can freak out and talk about it in church and try to defend myself, or I can just decide the buck stops with me, and right now what I have to bring is calm and faith, and not lose sight of the vision and not lose sight of direction. Number 6, openness. Openness to me. In other words, you're open. Doesn't mean you just spill your guts everywhere all the time to all the wrong people. But you're open. When you're open, you can be told. You will listen. Yeah. And number 7, faith. I think faith is demonstrable. It's demonstrable. That's a big word. It's demonstrable. Yeah. Faith's not foolish. It's not stupid. It's not presumption. But I tell you right now, when you really step out in faith, it looks foolish to other people. It really does. But when the buck stops with you, you can't pull back from faith. And number 8, a vision, but not just a vision that includes other people that people can buy into. You're responsible for that vision. I mean, when I at the beginning of the decade, who knew how things would be by now, I put out these decade goals. And they were really just for me. I wasn't intending to share them with anyone else, but I don't know what came over me. I decided to tell everyone. And one of those was in a decade, 5 million souls. And then I thought that through. And I'm like, excuse me, I almost said a bad word. How the heavens are we going to get 5 million decisions in 10 years? Do the math. And it doesn't help now that we're online, because all around the globe, and again with all churches, the one thing that maybe is different is there's not as many people making decisions because they actually have to do something. So in our setting, they actually have to go online to a specific Hillsong.com website, and there's something they have to do. The good news about that is they may be more quality decisions, because we're not just out there handing out Bibles. And so there may be more quality, but here's the thing about it. You've got to put yourself out there sometimes, and 5 million souls. I'm like thinking about everything. I was like, okay, our concerts all around the world, make sure they're counted, and make sure it's JD that's counting, because I love his counts. And if JD lets me down, I'm getting Sanger on the trip, because I'm telling you, when he was the wildlife leader here, wildlife had bigger numbers than the whole church. I love you, Sanger. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. 1, 12, 19, 461. There he is. I can actually, hey, quickly, because I've already gone over time, what the heck. So, Sanger, just defend yourself for a second.
Well, look, wildlife, it was the dream life. It was growing, it was booming. We were just going with it, Pastor Brian. We were just in the caught up in the moment. It was powerful. Yeah, we saw good growth.
Yeah, I was a parent back in those days, which was bad news for you, because I'd be outside youth waiting for it to finish on a Friday night so I could take my kids home. And it wasn't just me I was worried about, it was like all these other parents that were out there. And poor old Sanger, now I wouldn't have a clue. But you always wore the brunt of that. You were a fantastic youth pastor, to be honest, and you did build something incredible, and you did have unprecedented momentum. just for the record. All right, go away. See you later. All right, number 9, insight. Insight, intuition. Out of all the sights, I think insight's the most important. You got hindsight, anyone can do that. You got foresight. Foresight is a fantastic gift when the buck stops with you. Foresight, thank God for it. When you can see ahead and you can understand accountability. But I think the best of those 3 sights, hindsight, foresight, is insight. Because insight, it's a savior when the buck stops with you. Because you can see into something. You don't just see the glossy surface. You can see in behind that. You can see motives. You can see possibility. You can see potential dangers. You can see a whole lot. Number 10, inspiration. I think if you're inspiring and the buck stops with you, it just affects the whole tenor and tone. I think it affects the whole DNA if you are easy to follow because you're inspiring.